Welcome to another episode of Kung Fu Conversations. I am a little bit giddy today. Not only do we have our first Wing Chun person on the show, but somebody that I have read and followed for my entire 25-year Wing Chun journey. The world-renowned and world-class, classy gentleman, Sifu David Peterson. Sifu, thank you for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you to invite me.
So, Sifu, we have a lot of practitioners from all over the world that listen to the show. And since you are the first Wing Chun person, just in case some of the Tai Chi guys, some of the Choi Li Foot guys, some of the Tong Bei guys have been sleeping and living under a rock, and they don't know you, would you tell us your martial journey, Sifu?
Well, it began 50 years ago this year, actually.
Wow.
So, yeah, I've been in training, in regular training of one kind or another since 1973. I was a child of the Kung Fu boom era, the Chop Socky period. Big fan of Bruce Lee, obviously, since the 60s, because on Australian television we got the Green Hornet and similar things. And one particular show was a Japanese black and white serial called The Samurai. And I got kind of all caught up in the Asian martial art buzz when I was about 6 or 7 years of age and went on from there. So I first did Shaolin Chuanfao, Shaolin Kung Fu, under a teacher that had been trained with just a handful of students. And he was traveling down from Sydney to Melbourne, which is quite a journey. It's like going from New York to Chicago or something like that every time you wanted to run a class.
Wow.
So the training was a little bit intermittent, and he was a very slow, methodical instructor. So in the 2 or 3 years that I was with him, we didn't get too far. But at the same time, I was hanging out with friends who'd done other things, and we all wanted to learn Wing Chun because we all knew by then that Bruce Lee had done some Wing Chun. And it just went from there. I ended up with a guy who said he trained with Wong Shun Leung and purported to be someone who'd spent more than a year with Wong Shun Leung, but that turned out to be a different story in the end. But I followed that fella for just on 10 years and ran 7 classes all around the city of Melbourne on his behalf, did all his advertising, answered all his phone calls, and after a period of time realized that every time we asked a question, we were told, oh, when you're ready, but when you're ready never came. Wow. And so I started realizing that maybe he didn't really have the goods. So I started researching where else I could learn the system properly. And my research led me to writing a letter to Wong Shun Leung and ending up in Hong Kong. And I was with my Sifu Wong Shun Leung since 1983 until, unfortunately, he passed away way too early in the beginning of 1997.
Wasn't he about 61, Sifu?
Yeah, he just turned 61. He was a very young man. Sadly, as I tell people with a sort of an irony, he learned 2 things from Grandmaster Yip Man. One was the great martial art of Wing Chun, but the other one was sadly how to smoke lots and lots of Camel non-filter cigarettes.
Yeah,
and it was probably those cigarettes that caused us to lose him.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was talking to my own Sifu. I've been training under my Sifu Herbert Mayer, and the Wong Q method since 1998. And this year would have been Wong Q's 100th birthday. And I think about what would these gentlemen think of, where Wing Chun is now and the world of Chinese martial arts is now and where it might be going in the future. So, yeah, that's one reason we have someone like yourself on the show, because we'd love to hear your, not only your story, but your opinion on, the state or the pulse of Chinese martial arts and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting to ponder what they would think, actually, because personally, I think the world of Wing Chun there are some highs and there are some lows. And there's a new generation who seem to think that if they've spent 10 minutes on YouTube or watched the Yip Man movies 4 or 5 times, that they can set up a school and call themselves a grandmaster. And that was something that would never happen in the past and wouldn't have been tolerated anyway. But you've got all these wannabe 3rd and 4th generation guys that are trying to say that they know more than the people that were actually there when it was all happening. And it's a sad state of affairs. that's why I keep plugging on. I'm getting tired. I'm 67 years old, and it's getting hard to even walk up the stairs to the training hall these days. But I keep plugging on because I'm trying to keep the old values alive and try to pass on the legacy as best I can.
Now, were you actually traveling to and spending some long periods of time in Hong Kong, or was Wong Shun Leung also coming over to stay with you in Australia?
It was a bit of both. I would go there as often as my holiday time from my professional job would allow. Sometimes those holidays would be 2 weeks. Sometimes they would be 2 months, sometimes in between. So what I do is get on the plane, get to Hong Kong, train like a crazy person, then come back and train like a crazy person until the next time that I could go across. And on 5 separate occasions, I brought my Sifu to Australia, and he stayed in my house, and we spent many hours talking and discussing Wing Chun, doing a bit of hands-on practice. And also he would go to my classes that I was running in Melbourne and interact with my students. So we had a pretty good relationship because I could speak to him in his own language, whereas a lot of the other foreign students weren't able to do that. So not taking anything away from their skills, because some of them are damn good. But I still feel to this day that perhaps I got a slightly deeper idea of the system simply because I could communicate in Chinese with Sifu. And that helped me to understand things at a level where some people probably don't quite get it.
So did you pick up Chinese like before you had started interacting with Wong Shun Leung, or was that something that you did in order to do that? Or
well, my fascination with Asian culture and Asian martial arts had led me to take up Chinese anyway. So I already had a degree in Chinese by the time I went to Hong Kong.
Oh wow, okay.
I spoke Mandarin quite fluently, and then once I was in Hong Kong, initially my Sifu and I communicated through Mandarin and with a dictionary if necessary, and with the help of other students who spoke both English and Cantonese. But by and by, I picked up Cantonese, and I had a spoken command of Cantonese. I've never had a formal class in Cantonese, sitting in a classroom learning it, but I can get by in Cantonese quite well. So in the end, Sifu and I would communicate mostly in Cantonese.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
It's just part of the passion, and you really want to learn something. You take every step you can to get there. And I was very motivated to try to learn the language. It was a big part of what I wanted to do.
What was a typical class like? I mean, you probably had varying degrees of what training with Sifu Wong Shun Leung would have been like. But, when you were in Hong Kong, let's say for the 2-month stints, what would a regular class of Wong Shun Leung's school, what would that look like, Sifu?
It wasn't like the classes you see these days that are mostly formal classes with people lined up being instructed as a group to go through this action or that action or this drill or that drill. It was a lot more, you get shown something briefly and then you're expected to go over in the corner and work on it like crazy. And at any time there wouldn't be more than maybe, let's say, between 5 and 10 people in the room. It wasn't like the room was overflowing with people falling out into the hallway. There were people who would come in when they could get away from work or school, train for a little while, then leave. Others would then come in and take their place. As a visitor, I was there the full amount of time that the doors were open. And even when Sifu went off to dinner, I was still training. I would just keep guzzling water or have a snack in my bag, and I'd keep training, whether it was just me and 1 or 2 other guys or just by myself until he came back, because I knew that my time there at those visits was limited, so I wanted to maximize it. But there was nothing like a formal class where everybody lined up and was shown what to do. But what would happen is Sifu might see something being done and realize there's a mistake being made, and he'd come over and he'd stop us and he'd show us a better way to do it. Or he'd watch people training and they'd say, okay, let's discuss blah, 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 whatever it might be. And he'd then start a little mini workshop and we'd just drill something and he'd show us a way to train it. And at least once a month or so, he would set up a date. It was usually a Thursday night, but not always, but usually a Thursday night. And he'd say, on this night, I'm going to talk about, let's say, for example, Siu Nim Tao, the first form, or Chum Kill, the second form, or we're going to discuss something about the wooden dummy, etc. And on that night, those who were really keen would come in and he'd basically get the chalkboard out and he'd start breaking the system down and explaining the moves and the science behind it. So we got this little bit of formal instruction and a lot of informal instruction, and mostly it was interaction with your training brothers and sisters. So someone would just come up to you and say, let's do Chisao, or let's do Paksao, or let's do whatever it is. And you do it until you were tired, and then you go back in front of the mirror and do the form, or go back to the wall bag and punch the wall bag, or go back to the dummy and hit the dummy, or whatever you wanted to do. It was a very self-motivated type of training. Nobody made you do it. If you sat down and just watched, no one's going to say, come on, get up and train. They'll let you sit down and watch because that was your issue. That was not their issue.
Wow. It sounds like it was almost an individual's journey with how much you were going to get out of the system. It seemed like it was a lot on the individual's shoulders.
Yeah, very much so, which is quite different to the way most schools are run these days. I try to strike a balance between what I call traditional training, or we call it Hong Kong style training, which is the way we learn in Hong Kong, as I described, and the more modern guided approach. Because as a trained school teacher, I was a teacher in private schools in Melbourne for 31 years, so I know how to teach. That's my profession, or at least it was. So I try to strike a balance between guided instruction and self-motivated instruction. And if we can find the blend between the two, you usually get the best results. The students need to be able to, it's like that story that was, Bruce Lee was quoted saying it sometimes, and other people have said it. You know, I can, if I'm a fisherman, I can get you a fish every day and you have to come to me for a meal every day, or I can teach you how to fish and then you can make your own meal. I'm trying to get the students to the point where they can do their own fishing.
Very much so. Very much so. It's funny because you bring that up, and I was just going to ask, what are some of the different things in your modern methodology of teaching that you did differently than, maybe Wong Shun Leung did? And that sounds like you just answered it. Is there anything else? You've mentioned a lot in the interviews that I've heard and listened to you speak, Sifu, that you've tried to keep at least the mechanics of what Wong Shun Leung taught you, as far as the forms go, as far as the drills go, and things like that. Have you mutated or changed anything like that, or have you kept it pretty much?
I've kept it pretty much as it was shown to me, because I think if it works, why change it? We have an expression in Australia: if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Absolutely.
So I've kept it very much the same as it was shown to me. I explain it the way it was explained to me, and I demonstrated the way it was demonstrated to me. But I'm also aware that not everybody's the same. And like my Sifu, he would modify things or bend things a little bit to suit an individual who was having difficulty one way or another. Classic examples. There's my very well-known Kung Fu senior brother, Philip Bayer in Germany, who had an accident and lost a hand.
Yes.
Every other instructor turned him away. Wong Shun Leung said, come in, let's get started. And he found a way to help Philip to learn, even though he had that handicap of not having a hand on one side of his body. I have a student in Melbourne, Terry Hayden. Terry lost his leg in a boating accident many, many years ago. And when Sifu came across, we were already training with Terry, and he was quite good. But Sifu had a word in his ear, and all of a sudden he found a better way to try to move with his impediment. So Sifu was like that. He was quite the genius. He could help people and figure out how to use their body in a way that suited them. And so I try to be as aware as he was of people's individual needs and see what I can do to help them. And I will confess that there are a couple of ideas within, perhaps, let's say, the wooden dummy or in training Chisao or something like that, where I've shown my students something that's a little bit different, not to throw away what we've had before, but to say, here is an alternative which you can use if it suits you. I'm not saying this is Wong Shun Leung's way. It's something that I've found. It might work for you. It might not. Consider it. Don't throw it away straight away. But if you don't like it, if it doesn't work for you, then don't use it. So I think everybody brings something to the table. I just try very hard not to bring anything extra that it doesn't need to be there. So generally speaking, I'm fairly confident that what I show my students is pretty close to what I was shown, as close as possible. And as a result, that's how I apparently got the nickname, the Blueprint of Wing Chun. I didn't come up with that one. The other people came up with that one. And according to a couple of accounts that I've heard, I wasn't there when it was said, that when Sifu was asked by a couple of different visitors at different times, including correspondence he had through an intermediary with Jesse Glover, the late Jesse Glover, who's a dear friend and a mentor of sorts, he was told by Wong Shun Leung that of all the foreign students, David Peterson shows it the most accurate. So that was quite a proud moment for me to hear. I didn't learn any of that until after Sifu died. Because like a typical Chinese father, they don't tell you that they're proud of you. They tell everybody else they're proud of you, but they never tell you. And it was kind of a bit of a shock and also a revelation to learn that he felt that way. So that was kind of nice.
Wow. That is a compliment. Wow.
Yeah. So as a result of those conversations, the rumors started going around about what I could show people, and that's how they invented the term that I was the so-called blueprint of Wing Chun, of Wong Shun Leung Wing Chun, which is a nice compliment, but it's a big thing to live up to.
Right.
I can tell you're putting out right now some YouTube and also on Instagram video content on looking at one specific skill, or, maybe a little bit of Sunam Tao, or maybe a little bit of this. And I'm finding that to be absolutely dynamite. One of the things, so I'm what my Sifu calls his representative. So I don't have a Sifu status, but I've been training with him for 25 years. And there's a few little things here and there that I don't have with the system, but I've got the 3 unarmed forms. I've got a lot of drill sets from Sifu, the weapons, the mokjong, and a few other things. But it's interesting because one of the videos that really stuck out to me, we have a different term for it, but it's not the terminology that's important. It was the lesson that was being taught, was the opening hands. We refer to those as hoisek, but you were explaining that this is a depth gauge, a measurement gauge. And you're the only person that I've ever seen explain that. And I find that a lot of these little fine details that seem little, but as you get further down the road in your training, if you don't have that microscopic detail, it becomes a semi-truck hole in the training process overall. And I wanted to thank you for those videos, because I think what you're doing there is fantastic work. And it's great too, because I get to see some things. I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard that, or I've seen that. And so I really love those videos. What made you decide to work on videos like that, Sifu?
That's all the brainchild of somebody that you probably know in the USA, a guy called Ronnie Chang, the comedian.
Yes.
Ronnie was my student in Melbourne for a number of years before he moved on and ended up in the US. And he still trains quite religiously in several martial arts, including his Wing Chun when he can. And he kept pestering me for years that I should start getting on Instagram, because I was never on Instagram until the last 18 months or so.
Yep.
And he just kept saying, you need to get on there. You need to get on there. And I kept saying, it's not my thing. It's not my thing. And eventually he even purchased the tripod and the sound gear and had it sent to me and pushed me to do it.
Good man, Ronnie.
And so because of Ronnie's pushing and a few other people, another fellow, one of my younger Wing Chun brothers in America, a fellow called Ho Louie. So shout out to Ho. He and Ronnie, between them, kept saying, if you were to put out a little series of videos, just small chunks of information, enough to whet the appetite of someone who doesn't know, but also something to stimulate someone who's been doing it for years and thinks they know everything. And we decided on what we've ended up with now, which is these little 3.5 to 4 minute chunks. Sometimes we go a little bit over, but we try to keep it within 3.5 to 4 minutes. And we looked at a whole bunch of individual topics, and then we struck upon the idea, well, let's just look at the forms. And as it's turned out, we're now focusing very, very closely on Sinuntal on the first form. And at the rate we're going, it's going to be a while before we get through it. But it's a nice complement to the DVD that I produced way back in 2008 or 2009 for Crane's production. It's like an update on that material. Plus, being in little chunks, you can digest it nice and slowly.
Absolutely.
And when we get through Sinuntal, perhaps we'll go off and look at some other topics for a little while, and then we might tackle Chum Kill in the same way and just keep moving through. It just depends how long I'm around for, because you never know. These days, life can be taken away very quickly. So, but also with regard to what you said about we call it the Hoima section, the opening of the stance, no credit goes to me for that. That's word for word everything Wong Shun Leung said about it. I'm just regurgitating from the source. So it's not something I've come up with or something that I've invented.
Sure.
I've just decided to talk about on the spot. That's the lesson as it was passed on to me. Because Sifu was very good at presenting in a formal situation as well. On the occasions where we did seminars and I was his translator, which made a big difference to my own understanding, because him and I would interact almost like Laurel and Hardy. Before the words were finished coming out of his mouth in Cantonese, I'm already explaining it to the assembled audience in English, because we're on the same wavelength. We had a very good rapport that way. And so I learned through those experiences how to deliver the information with the accuracy that he brought to the table. So those segments that you're watching on Instagram and Facebook each week and on YouTube, we just for the listeners and the viewers' information, every Sunday evening at 6:00 roughly about Malaysian time, we drop a new one on Instagram and it goes onto Facebook automatically. And then the Monday after that, we put up the last week's one, so that I'm building up the library in YouTube. So the Instagram and Facebook is where you get it fresh, brand new. And when you want to go back and review it, the easiest place to find everything is on the YouTube page, which is our own dedicated YouTube page. So that's how it works.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Awesome.
And I've got to work on that Malaysian time thing.
Never mind.
You've been also an excellent writer. You've put out two books now, or one?
Yeah, 2 books. And I also helped Eric Lilio with the writing of the Gong Sao Wong book. There's a lot of me in there, but Eric's the main driver behind it. A lot of my photographs are in there because, sadly, a lot of the students, just to digress, a lot of the students from my generation, the first generation, didn't have much in the way of photographs for Sifu because their attitude was, he's always going to be here, I'll get photos later. And then he wasn't. But people like myself and, again, my Sihing's Philip Bayer, we really valued the time that we had with Sifu and we wanted to make sure we had the memories. So we kept a fairly good collection of video and photographic references of what we did. And because of us, now there's a lot of material around on the internet because no one else has that material. So with the Gong Sao Wong book, if you go through with a fine-tooth comb, you'll see a lot of the photos are actually credited to me because the other people sadly didn't have photos themselves. So, yes, I've been behind 2 books. My first book I self-published in, I think it was 2001. I did that because after my first invitation to travel to the United States by Sifu Jesse Glover, after delivering seminars in Los Angeles at Sifu Hawkins Chong's school and then in Seattle at the school of James DeMille, who's also passed on, I came back with a kind of renewed confidence that I knew what I was talking about at last. I never felt that way before. And I also felt a big debt to my Sifu that I had to pay it back somehow. So that's what prompted me to come up with my first edition of my original book, Beyond the Pointing Finger, Look Beyond the Pointing Finger. With the pressure, I guess, the friendly pressure of Crane's Productions and the guys there, they pushed me to do a rewrite of that book and expand it. And that was the softcover one that came out a few years later, which a lot of people apparently now have copies of, which I'm thankful for. And then just after I came to Malaysia, we produced the hardcover special edition version of that one, which is the most up-to-date version. And then I still consider that still my first book. That's the same book. It's just been expanded and added to and made more comprehensive. It's essentially my Sifu's own words and I expand on what he's saying and clarify what he meant by what he was saying. But it's essentially Wong Shun Leung talking to the audience, saying this is what Wing Chun is from my perspective. A few years down the track, Eric Lilior from Wing Chun Illustrated magazine gave me a bit of a prod and convinced me to write a second book based on all the articles that I'd already been writing in my column for Wing Chun Illustrated magazine. So I took a lot of the column articles that I'd already done and expanded them, pushed them out much, much bigger, put more detail. Because, of course, in the magazine, you got 3 pages and you have to say everything you need to say in 3 pages, which doesn't allow you to say everything at all. So you have to cut corners. But with this opportunity, I was able to take those chapters and say as much as I wanted to say about the particular topic involved. And so that became the second book, the WSLVT book, the Wong Shun Leung Wing Chun Kun Hop. I think the full title is an overview in the form of essays. And that's got historical components. It's got photographic components. It looks at technicalities. It looks at drills. Basically, I try to look at everything in as much detail as I could. So, yeah, that's what I've done so far. Plus, I don't know how many articles I've written in the International Martial Arts Press. It started in 1988 and it just went from there. So on my desk at one of my schools here in Malaysia, my main school in Seremban, I've got on the desk every time we open the doors, there's 3 folders that contain most of what I've written. And they're 3 folders that are about this thick. I've lost count of how many articles I've done and interviews that I've done, but there's been a bunch of them. So I've been very lucky. I've been given opportunities that would never have come to me had I not been involved with my Sifu and practiced his martial arts. So like I've said recently in another interview that I've done for a documentary that's coming up sometime next year about Grandmaster Yip Man and the history of the system, if it hadn't been for Wing Chun, then my life would have taken a very different direction and probably would have been very boring. So the majority of the cool things I've done, the great people I've met, the places I've visited, the opportunities that I've had, 99% of it is from Wing Chun. As simple as that. So it's a big thank you to my Sifu because he made that all possible. The only part that I regret is that we lost him along the journey because it would have been cool if he was still around. But then if he was still around, I probably would have been pushed to do all this. So it's a catch-22.
Right. Wow. You mentioned that after you taught the seminars in California and then up in Seattle, that you felt pretty good about what you were teaching. Now, you came from a background of a teacher and an educator. When you went into your Wing Chun journey, were you always wanting to be a teacher of Wing Chun or more of a practitioner that wound up transitioning over to the teacher's role?
Very much the second. I just wanted to learn. I wanted to be really good at Kung Fu and get as far into this whatever system I was training as I could. So I dabbled in several different systems over the years. The longest time spent was, apart from Wing Chun, was in Hong Kong and in Tai Chi. And I actually dabbled in both the Yang system and the Chun system of Tai Chi. And I have a reasonably good understanding of how they work, but I would never call myself any kind of expert on either one. Wing Chun is my thing. That's where I feel I know the most and I can do the best job. But in terms of my goal was never to be a teacher. I almost became a teacher by accident. Various things happened that pushed me into that role. And that's just where the journey took me and is still taking me. So unlike, again, I refer to the current generation, there's a lot of people now who they want to train for a week and open a franchise of schools the week after. And I get so many inquiries from various places around the world. I won't say where because it might reflect badly on different people. But so many people say, oh, I'll come to your school for a week and then I'll go back and open schools in your name in my country. Or you come to my country and do a few seminars and then we'll open schools and we'll put your name on it. And I just say every time, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Because if you're not prepared to train for a length of time, you're not going to have enough skill and enough background information to be able to be anybody's teacher, let alone be good yourself. But there's this modern attitude of, I want it now. It's got to be a quick fix. It's too much internet thinking. Now press the button, got a result. That's not how Kung Fu works. The term Kung Fu, translated in its most broad sense, is a skill created through effort and time. It's an achievement that you get because you worked at it for a long time and you sweated and you bruised and you bled to get it. And anybody who thinks differently just doesn't get it. But I'm old-fashioned. Everyone says, oh, you're old school. Old school is the way to learn it. The modern way is not going to work. You can't plug yourself in like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It's funny because, you think about that and you look at, let's take a different profession. You look at a professional piano player. Are you wanting to listen to somebody that practices for an hour once a week or somebody that dedicates an hour or two every day? That's the person that you want to hear and pay your money to play that piano because they have developed a skill over a long period of time. And for some reason, I agreed with you. I think, in the world of martial arts, there are the weekend warriors that feel like they can take that seminar and in 20 hours understand what an entire system is. And that doesn't make any sense. If you say it in a different context, you just move it over here a little bit and you present it something like that way. It's like, have you spent thousands, not tens of hours, but thousands of hours and years doing the same process and going deeper and deeper into that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was well said, Sifu. Thank you.
Yeah, I always think that it has to do a lot with the intellectualization of things these days. As people think, well, intellectually, I may understand the concepts of a martial art or something like that, but actually physically putting it in your body and translating those concepts into something you can interact with somebody else, that's a whole different thing. It's very, very different. I was going to ask you, with your teaching background, how do you think that's informed? I know you had said you work on this sort of idea of balance a little bit, but is there any other ways that may have informed your current teaching? And then maybe how has your teaching evolved over time?
Well, the first thing that probably makes a big difference being a trained teacher is that, excuse me, you can find the links between things and work through a pattern of movement that will take a student from one point to another with a clear journey, not just haphazardly, let's do a front kick, now let's do a back fist, now let's do this, let's do that. It's a system of martial arts, it's not a style. So Wing Chun works because everything connects. So I can start the class with, let's say I'll start with a simple punch step drill of some kind. But in my mind, that can take me to a whole different journey for the student on that particular occasion. And so because I'm a trained teacher, I can see the links between one idea and another. And so what starts off as a simple idea becomes a really fulfilling and complex set of practices over a period of 2 hours or 3 hours. And the students end up going home going, wow, that really worked. I got that. It all makes sense. And they start to see how all the individual pieces along the way are required to bring together to make the system work. If you're not trained as a teacher, you'll tend to just pluck things out the air. But teachers go through, most teachers, if you know anybody who is a teacher or if you've ever been a teacher and trained to be one, there's a thing called lesson plans.
Absolutely.
And teachers in training hate lesson plans. And the lecturers always insist that you have this and that and the other always in the lesson plans, and they tear you to pieces if you don't have all the pieces within the plan. But the thing is, by doing that over a number of years, physically writing it down, eventually you do that in your head and you actually walk in the door already having a fair idea where you're going to go. But also because you're trained, you have the flexibility to be able to change it if the class structure is not exactly what you thought it was going to be. So you might walk in the door thinking, oh, all my seniors will be there tonight. We'll do this because that's cool. And then you got 3 new people in the room. You can't do that stuff anymore, but
that's
you
right.
still find a way where you take care of everybody's needs. And trained teaching gives you that ability. If you're not a trained teacher, you walk in and go, oh, damn, what do I do now? And you'll be trying to figure out what the class is going to be doing. I see the class, think, okay, I know what I'm going to do. Bang, just go there. And even within the lesson, it may evolve differently to what you had in your mind. Because a question from a student or a problem a particular student or a pair of students is having can redirect the entire session to everybody's benefit, because it highlights a problem that other people might have but don't realize they have, or never came across it and questioned it before. So every lesson needs to be flexible and flowing. It's a little bit like the be water, my friend, idea.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to go with the flow, but stick to the ingredients. Always keep the ingredients correct, but modify the recipe if you have to.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic.
Awesome. Let's say Owen and I are rookie students and we are about to enter into Sifu David Peterson's school. What would the first 2 or 3 weeks or a month be like of training Sifu as a rookie at your school?
Well, if we take the first lesson as a starting point, I have a kind of a rule in my mind that every time a student comes, basically our sessions go for around about 2 hours or more, depending on the day and whether people can hang around. But I essentially work on a 2-hour platform. So every first lesson student, we try to cover 5 things. The first thing is to learn how to make the basic stance, the Iji Kimilma, the basic platform for Wing Chun, which I tell my students there's only one stance in Wing Chun, and that's the Iji Kimilma. Everything else is a derivation or a modification of that stance. And that particular position needs to exist within every type of footwork that you do, or else you're not doing Wing Chun footwork. So we start them with the footwork. Once we've got the footwork, once we've got them in a stance, we introduce the basic punch. We start with a very big version of the punch, as in the beginning of the form, the long punch, which I explain to them, you're never going to use it in a fight, is to teach you a concept. In fact, a series of concepts: facing, center line, relaxation, keeping the body still, using the elbow, not the shoulder, and so on. Then we move on to reducing the punch down to its normal length, and then double punch, triple punch. And I usually don't go beyond 3 because it's not practical. You can't hit someone 10 times in a row, because if you can hit someone 10 times in a row, your punch is crap. It means it's got no power. So unless he's tied to a chair or staked to a post, 10 punches in a row is a waste of time. So triple punch is the maximum that I teach anybody to do, because it pushes you to try and go faster and get more coordination, but it's not unrealistic. You could hit someone 3 times if you got footwork with it as well, but 1 or 2 is going to be more likely. Then we teach them how to move in a forward direction. Wing Chun is an aggressive martial art. So the first steps you learn are attacking steps, because you don't want to learn. I don't teach self-defense. That word is not in my dictionary. Right? Wing Chun doesn't believe in self-defense. It's an offensive martial art. It's like the military. Armies don't defend a country. They attack the enemy. The media calls it defending the nation. Actually, it's my army attacks your army, and we see who wins. So individuals do the same thing. If I'm standing there blocking your punches, defending myself, that means you're still winning, because you're still attacking. What I need to do is reverse that situation as quickly as possible. So I need to be able to go forward and hit you. So I show my students first how to move forward. From the Iji Kimilma, we modify into the basic stepping position, adding 1 punch at a time, then 2 punches at a time, and then multiple punches with multiple steps. Then we look at defensive footwork, what we call toima. We start with the basic idea, which we work it around the idea of a clock. If there's a clock on the ground and you're in the center facing 12, for us in our family, we want to move either to the 5 o'clock or the 7 o'clock position. Anything wider gives my opponent time to chase me. Anything less means I'm still in front of the attack. So we try to always work in the 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock range. And then we do that on its own. Then we add a punch to that. Then we combine the two ideas of the footwork, get out the way and move in. So we're beginning to get the student's mind focused on the most important aspect of what Wing Chun is. The sooner I can get off the line and hit you, the better. I'm not just training you to be physically different in the way you respond. I'm trying to mentally program you to think differently. And that comes from those exercises. So that's already the four. There's the form, the stance. I'm getting to the form that's in my head. Is the next thing to look at. The stance, the punch, forward steps, defensive steps, the combination of those two, and then finally the first section of Sinintel. Just the first section, the slow part, because it's easy to try to remember. It's not too difficult. So there's really only a few movements in it. It's not complicated. It's just repeating it to learn how to do it. And that would be your first lesson. If you came to my school for 2 hours, you would be covering those 5 ideas. From then on, from the second lesson onwards, we put you in with the main group for as long as you can keep up with them. And we just add on to those things a little bit at a time. I'd advise you, do what you can. Don't try and worry about what you can't do. Stick to the things you know. We'll get to it, because usually during the class of that kind, partway through the class, generally within the first 30 minutes to an hour, I'll split the class up, give the seniors things to do. If there's another senior that can take care of them, I'll put that person in charge, and I'll take the beginners and build on what they've learnt on that first lesson. And that'll proceed for a couple more lessons, and then we just throw you in the pool and get you to learn with everyone else. Because the best way to learn is from your peers. Yeah. Just like you want to be a good tennis player, go play with an expert. You'll get beaten a lot, but you'll learn a lot by being beaten. Right? If you want to be good at anything, you've got to get out there and try it against the best. So I'll bring you into the class as soon as I can, and we try to do a lot of interactive drills. It's not all individual techniques. It's a lot of interactive partner drills. And Wing Chun has a few classic ones like Pak Sao, like Chi Sao, like Lap Sao, and so forth. But also there are other things we can do, like I want to teach a person how to use the Wu Sao and the punch with their footwork. We can easily set up a drill for that and repeat it a few dozen times so they can feel the energy, because this is why I don't do video classes. I have a rule of thumb. If I can't touch you, I can't teach you. Right? You need to feel Wing Chun. You can't capture it in a photograph, and you can't capture it in a moving picture either, because you can't feel the energies that are involved. So the sooner I can get you working with a partner, the sooner you'll start to understand what Wing Chun is, because the pressure is what teaches you what to do. So I know that's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but in a nutshell, that's pretty much how I go about showing you how to do it. So within 2 to 3 months, you'd already be with the main group doing lots and lots of drills and things and working your way through the higher levels of training.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And intense. And thank you for giving the audience a little sneak peek of what it might be like to come say hello sometime.
Yeah, I had sort of a follow-up question around that, concerning like, Wing Chun weapons. Like when would you introduce weapons? Like I know that different lineages sort of introduce it at different times, but I was wondering, when do you think that that's appropriate?
As far as the pole is concerned, the 6.5 point pole, I don't make the students wait too long to learn that, because it has benefits in that it's building up strength in the wrists, increasing your punching power. It helps with your stance. It's actually overall quite beneficial to your long-term development. So we don't make the students wait too long for that, but I wouldn't introduce it in the first couple of months, because that would be too soon. They're having enough trouble understanding something as basic as a normal step and punch. Yeah. But within the first year, maybe a year and a half, I would already have some of the newer students already doing some of the basic actions of the pole, simply because I believe it's beneficial to them. But the batamdo, the 8/knives form, or what people often call the butterfly knives, but that's an incorrect term, but I know it's commonly used. The batamdo, we don't introduce that until way, way down the track. And it's not because it's a secret. It's not because it's some very special idea that can't be shared. It's because the Batamdo, like the Bilji form, contradicts a great deal of the basic rules. When I say rules, I mean guidelines of Wong Shun Leung Wing Chun. I'm speaking on behalf of my family system, not others, because I know there'll be disagreement. Other people have a different attitude.
Sure.
But as far as Wong Shun Leung Wing Chun is concerned, the Batamdo form, and as I said, the Bilji form, have ideas that totally contradict what you've been told to do and to not do within your basic training around what is contained in Sinintal, Chamkil, and at least the first half of the Mukyanzong, the wooden dummy. So if a student is struggling to understand the basic principles and techniques of the system, and then you suddenly hit them very early with a whole lot of contradictions to what they're being shown, you're just going to mess them up.
Yeah.
So it's very important with the Batamdo that the student has a very good grasp of the basic concepts and skills of Wing Chun before they tackle the knives, because otherwise it's going to totally screw up their understanding. And the thing about a weapon is it adds an entirely new dimension to what you've learned. You're no longer striking with your fist or your palm. You've got something ahead of you. If it's the knives, it's at least a forearm length longer than your arm. If it's the pole, it's 9 foot long. Right? Yeah. It's much greater than your arm reach. So the concept of distance, timing, strategy, it's all different. So if you haven't grasped how to use your empty hands against a person who's also empty-handed, how the heck can you judge the difference with a weapon in your hand? How can you understand the differences in the concept? And just as a sort of small digression, with Bilji, it's the same thing. All the way through your basic training, we're taught, don't cross your hands, don't use force, don't grab, don't bend your body, don't do this, don't do that. They're all dangerous things to do. In Bilji, you contradict every single one of those. So how does a student who's new understand, why am I doing it this way when you told me not to do it that way? So if you start them on things like Bilji and the Batamdo too early, confusion reigns havoc. But at least with the wooden dummy and with the pole form, the ideas are so similar that there's less chance of confusion. They can see the connection with those much more readily than they can with the other two. So that's basically my approach. And again, that's my Sifu's approach. Just to mention this because it's sort of on topic, Grandmaster Yip Man originally used to teach the forms in the order of Sinintal form, Chamkil form, Bilji form, wooden dummy. My Sifu disagreed with that, and he had lots and lots of discussions with Yip Man because he felt you should teach Sinintal, Chamkil, then at least half of the wooden dummy before you start the student on Bilji. His thinking was the concepts in Bilji are very different from the concepts in the other forms, but the concepts in the first half, that what he used to call the first 60 or thereabouts movements in the wooden dummy, are pretty much the same, except the dummy is also showing you how to correct minor errors, simple mistakes that everybody makes that are not going to cost you the whole fight. So he believed that if you learned Sinintal, Chamkil, and at least half the dummy, and then went on to Bilji, you would appreciate Bilji better because you have a better understanding of what it's trying to show you, which is things outside the normal sphere of movement. And so eventually Yip Man changed. He actually started teaching it in the other order because he realized Wong Shun Leung had a good point.
That's awesome. And thank you for that story. That's a great insight.
I think it's really neat because it shows that even, Ip Man himself was still, he was thinking about how he was teaching and he was evolving.
Yeah. I think that's why my Sifu was like he was, because I think Yip Man was very much always trying to find a better way to do things. And that's why the first night I met my Sifu in November of 1983, he said to me, and I quote, "If you can show me a better way of doing what I'm doing, I'll learn from you." And the moment those words came out of his mouth, in Mandarin, of course, at the time, not in English, I realized I'd found my Sifu. Because most other Sifus would say, it's my way or the highway. You do what I do or you don't do anything. He was a guy that was a legend, a living legend when I met him. And he was telling me if I could show him a better way, he'd switch over to my way. So I knew straight away, this guy is a genius. I want to learn from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he got that attitude from Yip Man. And that's why I think probably Yip Man loved him the way he did. In Hong Kong, they describe Wong Shun Leung as, they call it 叶问最爱的徒弟, which translates as Yip Man's most beloved student. And the reason he was so beloved was because Wong Shun Leung challenged Yip Man all the time and questioned. The others all said, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir, and just followed what they were told. And Yip Man always told them, don't believe everything I say. I might be lying. Sifu never believed what he said. He checked him out, and he told me the same thing. But he modified what Yip Man said to him when he said it to me. He said, don't immediately assume what I'm telling you is wrong. Test it, prove it's wrong, or prove it's right, and then we'll discuss it. So those 2 little gems stayed with me until this very day. And that's what motivates me, one of the things at least that motivates me to keep pushing the legacy, to make sure it's still out there, because he had so much of value to share. So I'm just trying to transmit that as much as I can.
Can you think of maybe a fun, if you'd be willing to share with us in the audience, maybe a fun anecdotal story of Wong Shun Leung, something you look back on and kind of chuckle at?
Well, something that pops into my head immediately is the first time my Sifu visited me in Melbourne was 1986, I believe. Or was it? Yeah, 85, 86, somewhere in there. I can't exactly remember. I remember the venues that we went to and everything, but the year escapes me. But it was around end of 85, beginning of 86. He had gotten off the plane and he was extremely tired. He didn't travel well. He didn't like traveling in planes too much, and he was feeling rather sleepy. So I suggested that he could sleep upstairs. At that time, my then wife and I had a townhouse in the suburb outside of Melbourne, and the upstairs was nice and quiet, and we could darken the room very well, and he could have a good rest. But the plan was that evening we were going to take him into the city to meet the students and to run the first class that he was going to run for the students in Melbourne. And he was quite happy to do that, but he was really tired, and I said, well, let's get you rested first. So we took him upstairs, let him get settled in the bed, and he was asleep very, very quickly because he was really tired from the journey. He probably was up there for, 3 or 4 hours. There was a bit of snoring going on, so I knew he was having a good sleep. But it was getting close to the time that we needed to leave because, as in most big cities, there's peak hour traffic to deal with, and you don't want to leave too late or else you won't get to your destination. So without knowing anything about him and his sleeping habits and his background, which will become relevant in a moment, I walked in, leaned over, tapped him on the shoulder, Sifu, time to get up. And he turned with a startled look in his eye, and the moment he looked into my eyes, I saw my life flashing in front of my face.
Oh, no.
The look of, you're about to die. And then it was like, it's me, Sifu, it's David, time to get up. And all of a sudden he realized where he was, and his eyes darted around to realize he was in the room, he wasn't in a fight. And I was like, oh, okay. And he got up. Later on, when he finally came downstairs, he had a big grin on his face. And I said, is everything okay? And he said, yeah. He said, I guess I should have told you. It's probably best not to wake me up so suddenly like that, because I've always had a problem since my Baymore days when I was fighting. Even my mother used to throw socks at me from the doorway to wake me up because I had a habit of jumping up and hitting people. He said, I'm kind of on a hair trigger. It's just part of who I am. So I never, ever woke him up the same way again because of that.
That's a great one. That's
a good story.
In your journeys, what took you to Malaysia? Was it students that wanted to learn from you that brought you over? How did your Australian journey take a turn to Malaysia, my friend?
Very simple. Love. I met my now current wife, my love of my life, the partner I should have found a long time ago, but it took a couple of attempts to get the right one. And she had and still has a very successful career here in Malaysia. She's a very much loved gynecologist and obstetrician in Malaysia. Half of the babies in the town that we live in are probably delivered by her and their children. And I was getting to the point in my career in Australia where life was just starting to suck. You weren't able to just be a teacher and go into the classroom and enjoy the subject that you taught, which for me was Chinese. You had to be a bookkeeper, a childminder, a sports teacher, and all these other silly administrative things that took away from the passion of being a teacher. And after 31 years in the job, I just about had enough, and I was trying to find what else could I do. And I'd always had this belief that I didn't want my passion or my hobby to become my profession, because I didn't want to hate my profession. Everybody has a job they have to do. I was a school teacher. You guys have your particular professions. You do it because you know you have to do it. You've got to put bread on the table, and you've got to survive. But we don't always love our job. Some days you wake up and go, oh, not again. But you go anyway because you have to. And then you have your hobbies or your passions, and those are the things you do outside of work, and you love them. And for me, that was Wing Chun. So my passion, everyone used to say to me over the years, oh, you love Wing Chun so much, why don't you teach it professionally? And I'd always say, no, I don't want to hate my job. I don't want to learn to despise what I do. So I'm going to keep it as my hobby. But then with life sort of turning a bad corner, my second marriage had failed, and I was in a bit of a dark place, to put it mildly. I met all of a sudden my current wife, and the opportunity was there. Instead of dragging her to Australia and forcing her to relocate and reestablish her career, why don't I go to Malaysia and see if I can find a way to reestablish my own life over there? And what can I do? Well, I was sick of teaching in a classroom in terms of teaching language. I didn't want to just reverse the role and become an English teacher in Malaysia. So the solution was simple: teach Wing Chun. And it sort of happened in a series of episodes. I was visiting Malaysia for a little visit each now and then to catch up with my then fiance. And word got out that I was in Malaysia. And I saw posts coming up on particular forums at the time. Remember the days when everybody posted on forums? They're just about dead now. It's all Facebook and Instagram. But once upon a time, everybody was on the Kung Fu forums. And I saw all these comments. Oh, does anybody know why Wong Shun Leung student David Peterson keeps coming to Malaysia? And I spotted one of these comments. So being a cheeky person that I am, I jumped on and said, hi guys, this is David Peterson. Actually, the reason I'm coming to Malaysia is to visit a friend. If you're interested in getting together and discussing Wing Chun, I'd be happy to meet up on my next visit. What do you say? And a couple of guys jumped on the opportunity and said, yeah, we'll meet you. And so on my very next visit, we arranged a meeting, and I sat down with a couple of guys, one of them being my student John Depp, not the movie star, a different John Depp. And John is now my right-hand man. He's my number 2 boy in the school, and he's an amazing fella. He's a former journalist and photographer. He's a brilliant artist. He's a magician, and he now currently runs a full-time coffee bistro in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and our school is upstairs from the coffee shop. So we've got the best of both worlds: good food, good coffee, and kung fu.
That's awesome.
So that meeting led to more meetings. Every time I come across, they eventually said, well, let's gather a few people together, and why don't we do a little workshop? So the first workshop was at the school that John was then running. He had a little group of students, and he was running classes a couple of times a week. So the first one, I think there was a dozen people came along, and they had a great time and were raving about it. So the next time I came over, there's about 25. And the next time I came over, they'd arranged a full-blown seminar in a hotel complex in one of the areas just outside of the city of Kuala Lumpur. And we had about 80 people turn up from all over Malaysia.
Wow.
And so basically by the time I got to Malaysia full-time at the beginning of 2011, John handed over the keys to his school and said, Sifu, it's all yours. So I had an instant school and an instant group of students and an instant new career. And it just went from there.
Good for you.
That's a fantastic story. That's awesome.
And I'm still very, very much in love and very happy with my wife, who's still with me and supports me every step of the way. So life is good, except for COVID. COVID kicked us all in the guts. I had to shut the doors of the school for 23 months, but the bills were still there. Still had to pay the rents and the power and the water and everything else and all the other things that had to be paid for. So I had to tap into my retirement fund, and I now have a zero bank account and a great deal of credit debt. And the students didn't all come back. We've lost about 85% of the students. So things are a bit tough at the moment. Hopefully they'll pick up, but at the moment things are a little bit difficult. In Seremban School, which is the big school, on an average class, the numbers used to be 15 to 25 people a lesson. It's 3 or 4 or 5 now, so it's not easy. Thankfully, in Kuala Lumpur, which has a bigger population, we're getting slightly more numbers than that, but still it's not like it used to be. But yeah, fingers crossed and prayers being sent upwards, things will improve.
We'll send you all the good energy, Sifu. So
yeah, that would. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know we don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you got class starting soon, and I don't know how. This one's going to be a big one. And you can drop as many F-bombs as you like. You were a guest on our show, and we drop as many as we like as well. This is one that I've really thought about for a while, and getting someone that's been a part of the Wing Chun community for so long and seen quite a bit of it. You started the show talking about this next generation. We'll call it the entitlement generation of Wing Chun. What are some of the things that might frustrate, frighten you, or upset you with the way that Wing Chun is progressing? What do you think we could, can be done to right that ship? But what are some of those things? If you got on the soapbox and said, what are we doing to Wing Chun? What do you think that would be, Sifu?
I know from past experiences, one of the issues is that whenever any of us oldies say something, we usually get jumped on very heavily by all the people who believe in the newbies. They're like a cult, and they have a cult following. And because they're willing to say that they know better, a lot of people of their thinking support their beliefs and what they say. So what usually happens is us oldies from the first generation get called out as being the bad guys, or you're trying to repress us. You're trying to take away our ambitions and our creativity. You're stuck in the old ways. You don't understand. Things have to change. And they often quote things like, look at MMA. MMA is the product of changing things for the better. Well, what they really don't realize is, and this is no reflection on MMA, and I have nothing against MMA per se, but the big picture that they're all missing is there isn't a single thing in MMA that isn't derived from traditional martial arts. So you can't say MMA is better than traditional martial arts because it wouldn't exist without traditional martial arts.
Amen.
That's the first issue. The second thing is they say, there's too much emphasis on forms and classical ideas, not enough emphasis on fighting. That's like saying give a 5-year-old a Ferrari and say go down the racetrack and go for your life. Or give a 4-year-old a scalpel and say get in there and do that operation. You have to go through a process of learning before you're ready to perform on the racetrack or in the operating theatre. There's a process. And too many of this generation are trying to shortcut the process. They want to do it all in a few weeks and open a chain of schools last week. They want to have fame and fortune without doing the work. You can't do it that way. And if they ever try to put themselves to the test, they usually end up flat on their back. Now, they'll very quickly say that, oh, look at all these classical martial artists that are getting knocked out by all these modern martial artists in the ring. Look very closely. Who are most of those so-called classical martial artists that are getting knocked out? They're nobodies. They're guys that trained 10 years ago, 20 years ago. They're not people currently in training. They're people who've never been hit before. They choose their targets very well, these guys that put up these videos. They choose people who don't know how to fight, and then they beat them up. They don't step into the schools of people with a good reputation for fighting and challenge them. Now, I'm not trying to create a stir here or call anybody out for a fight. I'm 67 years old. I don't really want to get into the ring and have a fight with anybody. But my point is, if you want to be good at the job of teaching any kind of martial art, doesn't matter what system, what family, what style, you need to put in the time and the effort. And that's missing from the current generation of practitioners, very largely missing. And that means that what the current learners are getting is a watered down, incomplete and untested version of the system, which then if they try to pass it on, following in the same footsteps as their teachers, it becomes even more diluted and more watered down and less effective than what they were given. And it's a little bit like the Chinese whispers. I tell you a story and you tell your friend and he tells his friend. And by the time it does the rounds and it comes back to you, completely different story. Because if you didn't hear the story properly the first time, you're going to repeat it wrongly and with your own embellishments. If you don't learn a martial art properly, you're going to repeat it wrongly and with your own embellishments. This is what's wrong with a lot of so-called Ip Man Wing Chun. Ip Man, God bless him, wasn't always careful about who he showed things to. He had a reputation of being known as Daksuk. Daksuk in Cantonese translates as Uncle OK. If Ip Man didn't really care for you too much, if he didn't really think you were that smart or really motivated, he wouldn't spend a great deal of time with you. He'd leave you with the other instructors and let you play with them. And what would happen is people would be training and they say, Sifu, tam taka. Is it okay, Sifu? Am I doing it right? And he would just look across and go, Datla, which means okay. He wouldn't correct them. And so he got this reputation of being Uncle OK. And so these guys thought he was saying, yeah, you're good. I agree with what you're doing. What he was really doing was dismissing them because he didn't really consider they were going to last very long. Time goes by. Ip Man's passed away. The Kung Fu boom is here. Everybody now wants to learn martial arts. And a lot of these guys now middle-aged haven't trained since the 50s or the early 60s, haven't even picked up a pole or a knife in all that time, suddenly see, wow, easy money teaching Kung Fu. Let's open a school. And what happens? They start teaching their vague recollection of what they didn't learn properly 40, 50 years ago. And now we have a whole new generation of Ip Man Wing Chun that's total bullshit. It's got nothing to do with Ip Man's Wing Chun. They've deviated so far from the model that it's glaringly incorrect, but they think they're right. Because, but he was a student of Ip Man, must be correct. Not all students learn the same amount of information. Not all students learn this for the same amount of time. Not all students put in the same amount of effort. You need to be very careful who you're learning from. My Sifu proved that the first time he challenged Ip Man's school. He beat up two of the students easily with a bit of simple boxing. After that, Ip Man shut him down, and we all know the story. He joined the school. But there's always going to be those guys that say they've learnt properly, but they haven't. There's a person currently doing the rounds in Wing Chun, mostly in the European theatre. I'm not going to name names. People know who I'm talking about. He's basically telling everyone that he knows better than all those that were there doing the training in the day. He spent a few days here, a few weeks there, a few months perhaps elsewhere, visiting teachers who were there, taking photographs with them, watching mine and other people's DVDs and reading our books and articles and so on. And he's basically regurgitating what we do, but doing it in a much more robotic, very machine-like way But because he's pushing himself as, how can I put it, the new messiah of Wing Chun. I've trained all these guys and I've been able to put together all the best of what they learned. So where this guy didn't get it all and that guy didn't get it all, I've got it all. And people are buying into this crap. And he's getting lots and lots of people following him, building up quite a big business for himself. But in the long term, what are those students actually getting? It's almost like pyramid selling. The guy who starts the business and the first few people who join going to get rich. But all the people down the bottom are paying a lot of money, but what are they really getting out of it? And this is my big issue with modern Wing Chun, is that it's going down that path. It's all about the cult of personality, and I know better than the old guys. The old guys might be old guys, and we might not move as quick and as powerfully as we did before, but we learned it from the source. You weren't there. You didn't hear what was said. You didn't feel what was done. You didn't get on the receiving end of those techniques. How do you know? But I'm preaching to people that either don't want to listen, or there's a handful that are going, yeah, I understand. We know what you're saying, but what can we do?
Yeah.
It's kind of, we're stuck in the middle of a problem that we can't really fix. And like I said, the moment any of us say anything about these people, we look like the bad guys. And I went through a period of quite a hammering a few years ago where everyone was attacking David Peterson because I was sticking up for the traditional approach to training and all the values that can bring to you. And I was being told that, you're old-fashioned, go back into the corner, you're refusing to change, you're not moving with the times. I still firmly believe that what I do is going to give you the results you want. You just have to be patient enough to train it. Instant results come with a price. Under a certain amount of pressure, perhaps those instant results aren't going to work just as well as the old way. It's a bit like, what's the better one? Traditional coffee or the instant kind? Instant one, you can get it straight away, but does it taste as good? The answer is probably not, unless all you know is instant coffee.
That's a great point.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, I like that.
Oh, and I've only got one more question for Sifu. How about yourself, my friend?
Go for it, man.
What's on the horizon, Sifu? Besides getting students back to the school, what's next for Sifu David Peterson in your martial journey?
I think overall, just to continue what I'm doing for as long as I can, make sure that I get the message out as clearly as possible, leaving behind enough reference material so that when I'm no longer around, and of course my Sifu was no longer around, if people are curious about what was the Wong Shun Leung Wing Chun Kuen Ho approach, they've got some references from a source that was close to the source, as well as the original stuff that exists with my Sifu. So that if they're torn between who knows better, this guy who's just the new kid on the block, or this guy who actually learnt from Wong Shun Leung all those years ago, then they can go and actually have a look and see, or read and see, discover for themselves where the answers might lie. So I think my days of traveling around the world doing seminars and so forth, I think they've pretty much come to an end. I find traveling now is becoming very tiring. I tend to have to, because I need to be here for my students, I tend to fly to my whatever destination it is, get off the plane after 14 hours, 20 hours, 24 hours, teach for a couple of days, get back on the plane, fly all the way back, and then go straight back into the classroom. And it totally exhausts me. I understand why my Sifu said just probably a month or so before he passed away, he was asked by one of the other Wing Chun nephews in Hong Kong when he was seen on the street after the trip to Beijing. The guy asked him, "How are you, Sifu?" "Oh, I'm so tired. They're making me do so many things. I'm so exhausted. I need a rest." And less than 2 months later, he suffered a stroke and died. So I'm now older than my Sifu was when he passed away, and you don't know what's around the corner. So I'm trying to preserve myself as much as I can. And so I'm telling people, it's better for you to come to Malaysia. The economy here is pretty low, So if you come over here, your money goes a long way. So it's better for you financially. It helps me because if you can pay me the fees that I'm asking, you're helping me build up my income and keep my school going. Mm-hmm. And it stops me from killing myself traveling. And especially now with COVID ever present, I've had COVID twice now. And I don't think third time would necessarily be a lucky one. So, and it's on the way back. In Malaysia, we've got rising numbers of COVID currently. Yeah. So we still insist people training with masks on and disinfect themselves as they train. And for all those reasons, and just generally just to make life a little bit more comfortable for myself, I think the best thing I can do is just keep producing the occasional article when I feel inspired to write something. I'm not a full-time writer for Eric's magazine anymore, but I'm thinking occasionally of doing maybe an article here and there. Keep producing the little videos because they seem to be very well received. I probably had less than 1% negative comments. Everything's been glowingly appreciative of what I'm doing. So I think
it's phenomenal.
I think we're onto something. So again, Ronnie and Ho, thank you for pushing me to do that. And thanks to all my guys here in Malaysia who helped me do it week in and week out. We're going to be shooting again on Sunday, which is tomorrow for me, because we've just about emptied the barrel, so we need to top it up again. So I'm happy to keep doing that, keep teaching my students here to make sure the next generation is well trained. And if anybody wants to come and learn, I only ask for 3 things: consistency, loyalty, and an effort. Make an effort. My Sifu said this similar things when he was asked, why do you teach the foreigners? Because a lot of the teachers, when he was teaching foreign students, didn't teach foreigners still. They kept it very much only Chinese. And he said, doesn't matter whether the student is white, black, green, yellow, orange, or blue, if they're willing to train hard, stay loyal to what I'm teaching them, and pass it on in a pure form, why shouldn't I teach them? It's irrelevant what their race, religion, or beliefs are. If they believe in Wing Chun, that's good enough for me. That's my attitude too. I've been burned in the past. I'm very accepting of people. I tend to trust everybody, which is just my nature. It's turned out to be a mistake on a few occasions. I've been badly betrayed by a group of students in a couple of countries. But I went in with the thought that I'm going to give you everything I can give you because I believe in you, and I hope you'll do the same. So I just ask the same from anybody that comes to me now. But I also put a caveat on that. If you're coming here just to get a name for yourself, or to take my name or my Sifu's name, or to train for a week and then open up a chain of schools, don't waste your time. Don't waste my time. I'm not interested. If you're prepared to keep coming back, at least semi-regularly, and put in an effort and go back and train like a crazy person, the way I used to train like a crazy person, you'll be welcomed with open arms, and my students will love to help you and train with you, and will make you part of the family. So simple as that. So that's my mission, I guess, is to keep doing it for as long as I can do it. So as long as the legs work and the brain works, I'll keep doing it.
Amazing.
That's awesome. Fantastic.
Sifu, thank you for your time. Yep. It has truly been an honor. I've been a fan of yours since we had a college group back when I started college back in 1998, and we were one of the math professors was teaching the Wing Chun Club, and I had the bug. It bit me, and you were one of those names way back when. And so it's a little bit surreal for me to see you and listen to you and be, not necessarily in the same room with you, but share some of your time. So thank you so much. This has been a real honor. And we will let you know when the episode comes up. And thank you again, Sifu. And keep training and stay healthy, and good luck with the school.
Thank you very much. And I'll make sure my students get the message when it's out so they can all tune in and build up your numbers.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sifu. Have a blessed day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. See you next time. Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.